8 o'clock, we're going to have another congressional candidate. We have many that are up and running for this newly created seat here in the 2nd District that goes from Golden Gate to the Oregon border along the California coast. And today's guest will be Andy Caffrey. So far as I know, the only Green Party candidate that's in the race, at least so far.
We'll have to make that clear, because I did get a call last time you announced that. That's told me that he was a Democratic candidate. So we'll have to get that clear and make sure that it is. I could have sworn he was a Green candidate too, but I don't know why that caller told me no, that was wrong last week.
Well, he'll be here live in person, and we'll let him help us learn what's the truth of that. We're going to hand it over to Marianne, and she can take care of KMUD's business, and we're going to come back with congressional candidate Andy Caffrey.
Be calling up the morgue, asking for you, or beating down these memories with one of your old shoes. I'll do the job in half the time using simple tools.
Monday Morning Magazine, Dennis Huber here, Marianne Norzer over there, playing that wonderful new Rycooter CD. I can't get enough of that yet. There's so many cuts on there that I appreciate. And we're joined now by Andy Caffrey, a candidate for the new 2nd District, the district that runs from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border, and for which there is no incumbent. And many candidates. Now, Andy, let's get something straight right off the bat. Are you a Green Party candidate?
No, not this election.
And so when you're asked the question of your party affiliation, what do you say?
Well, I'm registered Democratic right now, and that's what...
Well, then, there you are, Marianne.
Yeah, no, let me back up a little bit. I was involved in founding the Citizens Party in 1979, when we ran Barry Commoner, an environmentalist, and LaDonna Harris, a Native American woman, for president. That was essentially the first Green Party, and in fact, many of the European Greens came over to our convention and said, you are the sister Green Party in the U.S. Citizens Party only lasted about 4 years, and then in 1985, the modern Green Party movement started. It wasn't actually called the Green Party at the time. In Berkeley, we had the East Bay Green Alliance. So I've been involved in Green Party politics for over 30 years. And what happened is I found a way to not just run as a Green, but to actually get elected with my Green politics intact, but by registering as a Democrat. Sort of like Arlen Specter tried to get reelected by registering as a Democrat.
Right.
He didn't become a Democrat, really. I'm not becoming a Democrat. But what I am doing, I think now, 30 years later, there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party who would think Green politics is just great. So I'm organizing Green politics within the Democratic Party.
Well, yeah, no, that makes sense, because many people have pointed out how they feel that the Democratic mainstream has lost sight of those issues.
If they ever saw them.
Well,
I don't think they envisioned a post-industrialist society.
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay.
If you're going to be representing us in Congress, how would you anticipate this post-industrial moment in our history?
Well, I think we're at an incredibly critical time. I've been working on the climate crisis for 30 years, and the reason I am running is because after trying everything I can imagine, working in Earth First, in third-party politics, nothing seems to have gotten the society to shift gears to deal with the climate crisis. And I've even found that the forest activists that I've worked with for decades haven't even read a book on the climate issue, much less gotten involved. So we're in a dire predicament. For me, it has to do with the polar ice. I started studying Antarctica when I noticed in Time magazine back in 95 that a chunk of ice the size of Delaware broke off. Mm-hmm. So I started learning about ice ages and CO2 levels in ice ages. And I learned that in the last 2 million years, which is the ice age, that's the era in which our whole species evolved, there have been these cycles called glaciation periods. And they're roughly what we think of as the ice age, what we came out of 10,000 years ago, was one glaciation cycle of the ice age.
Okay.
And those cycles usually last roughly 100,000 years. And then there's an interglacial, which lasts about 10,000 years. And we are about 10,000 years into that. Well, now they can look 2.1 million years back in the historic record by looking at these ice cores, and they found that CO2 never got above 280 parts per million during the entire 2.1 million years. We're now at 390. Okay, so 280, and then you add 110 more. We're at 380. Well, every time it got to 280, it triggered an ice age, or at least an ice age kicked in. So the question is why? Well, the theory of ice ages has been, until last year, that it has to do with wobbling of the Earth, little eccentricities in the orbits. But when they found this ice record going back 2.1 million years, they found that pattern of the 100,000 years on, 100,000 years off disintegrated. So they don't have a theory now. But I came up with a theory, which was that since you have a natural greenhouse effect that occurs in every interglacial, because as the millennia pass by, the soils lose their ability to, they lose their fertility, they lose their minerals, all kinds of things. So the plants become less and less robust and therefore absorb less and less CO2. Mm-hmm. So you have a natural greenhouse effect in every interglacial. So my theory is that natural greenhouse effect gets to a certain point where West Antarctica breaks up. Now, West Antarctica holds about 10% of the world's ice, and it's different from East Antarctica because East Antarctica is entirely over land and surrounded by mountains, so it's got a little bowl that it sits in. But West Antarctica, which is the size of Mexico, is just held in place by little islands. So it's got water underneath, mm-hmm. and that's why these shelves started breaking off. So if you look at what happened at the end of the last interglacial 120,000 years ago, you find that sea level went up 20 feet and then down at least 50 feet in 100 years. That's a 70-foot net change in 100 years, and the ice age was on. So my theory was that the sea level went up because West Antarctica's ice broke. And now I would add Greenland. Greenland probably broke up, or part of it as well. Mm-hmm. And then that unleashed all of the ice that's piled up in Antarctica. In the center, it's 3 miles high. And so you have these ice shelves that ring Antarctica that hold that ice in. Picture a pancake. You pour the batter, and it goes down, but it also spreads out. Mm-hmm. Well, the ice moves too. It just moves about 1,000 feet a year. So what happened, and there's a scientist in New Zealand who came up with this in the 60s, is that the area of white at the south part of the world doubled in area. And that caused an additional reflectivity of solar energy into outer space, which caused the cooling that led to the ice age. So I got involved in this second phase of my climate activism to prevent the next ice age.
And that's almost taking us back to the question of, as a congressman, how can you further this? How can you be effective on the ground with this understanding?
Well, it has to do with my temperament and my background as an Earth First organizer. Also, the fact that you can watch Congress on TV every day. So if you want to run for Congress, you can learn all about the members of Congress by just essentially going to Congress every day, which I've done. And, I had a little bit of hope for Obama, but not much. I expected another Bill Clinton, and Clinton, sent Al Gore to gut the Kyoto Treaty. Right. So basically, I think what we can do is, the other candidates and other politicians think of getting elected to Congress, and then they fight on the House floor. They try to get some bills there. They support bills. They debate and all that. But I don't think of it that way. That's just one part of the arena. I have a big toolkit of organizing tools. For me, I have 3,000 Facebook friends who are, about 1,000 of them are activists all around the world that I've worked with for decades. So I've got this sort of advisory team that I've had. Mm-hmm. And when I get elected, I'm going to, after every day in Congress, videotape myself telling my constituents what went on that day, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, what the good legislation is and the bad legislation, so that I'm bringing our constituency into Congress. And at the end of the week, I'll have about a 3-hour webcast where people can ask questions. I'm going to be starting a webcast soon as well, and in a few weeks I'll start my town hall meetings, which are going to be very unique, because I'm going to start the process of citizens writing the legislation. So people will come and you mention an issue that's of concern to you, and we form little groups, and we start to work on actually writing out what we think should be accomplished. And then next month I come back and people can be working on them in between the visits, but over the course of 7 or 8 months. At a certain point, we'll bring lawyers in who can tweak it. But my idea is that I will be introducing legislation actually written by the 2nd District citizens. And so what I'll do is I'll go in there and I will raise hell via C-SPAN to the rest of the country to let them know what the real options are, which is the conversion that I propose in my New Green America proposals, which is a war effort to convert away from fossil fuels and nuclear as fast as humanly possible. And this should be done similarly to how we responded in World War II with a war effort. So I want President Obama to declare a national climate emergency and then announce that kind of a program to rebuild our infrastructure in this country in every community. Because if you think about the fastest way to eliminate greenhouse gases, it's to eliminate their consumption. And transportation is a big part of that. So if you don't have to get things from far away and you get things made locally, you've eliminated a lot of greenhouse gases. So the goal is to rebuild the infrastructure so that everybody can get things as close to home as possible, which means rebuilding the entire infrastructure for all the kinds of products that will be in this new world. It's got to be sustainable, so not all of that stuff is coming back, but all of your food production, your housing, your clothes, the rest of it should be made as close to home as possible. And so it's a huge work program. People talk about creating jobs, but there are some jobs that are bad and some that are good. Bush created a lot of jobs for the soldiers fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's jobs. And in fact, when they come back, they will have lost those jobs and they'll be among the unemployed.
Well, in fact, I think many soldiers have gone on record saying that the only reason they are soldiers is because that was the only place they could find a job.
Sure, the economic draft.
Yeah. Well, okay.
The other part, too, is the reason I actually even started thinking about running was there were a couple of events that occurred. First, I read in Michael Moore's book, Dude, Where's My Country?, a chapter called Liberal Paradise. And the liberal paradise is the USA. He has all kinds of statistics like you have in your Harper's Index there about Americans. And if you look at the whole agenda, except for some things like gay marriage, most Americans are actually liberal. And so that meant, well, there's a potential then for all these unregistered voters to be mobilized. And then in 2006, there were about 15 congressional races where the candidates won by 5,000 votes or less. To me, that means that the net roots organizers are the ones who made that difference. So I started thinking in terms of margin organizing, that the way we can get corporatists out is to get organized year after year, not just at election time, to support community leaders, people that have respect for what they've done for the community, supported to be the candidates instead of the typical corporatist politicians. And that would require essentially just organizing to beat the margin by which a liberal loses to a centrist or a Democrat loses to a Republican, and that's the goal. So we have a unique district here where 59% say they will vote for a Democrat, 19% say they will vote for a Republican. So here the name of the game is winning the Democratic nomination, which is why I registered Democrat. And before the open primary, that meant that I had to organize half the votes that Thompson got in the primary. He got 80,000 in 2006. So that meant for me to win the whole thing, I had to organize 40,000 people out of about 500,000 voters. And considering how District 1, before it was changed, the two main industries were wine and marijuana, we have quite a potential to elect this kind of person. And then the idea was that if I can get elected, and I'm not a famous activist like a lot of people like Jim Hightower, then those kind of people can start to get supported by the community. And in 2014, we could have maybe 5, 6, or 7 people who have essentially a green orientation and definitely an anti-corporatist, anti-militarist perspective.
Okay.